Hi everyone, and welcome to another Candace's Corner. My name is Candace Cunningham. I'm the host of Candace's Corner as well. We're gonna hear from different leaders in the developmental disability field. Candace's Corner is part of the reset at the USAID at the Institute for Human Development. We are a full training and technical assistance center for people with lived disability and developmental disabilities. The research is housed at the University Center on Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at the University of Missouri Kansas City Institute for Human Development. Today, guest is Will Hack from Missouri Protection and Advocacy is in Missouri Protection and Advocacy is the USAID's sister organization. So hi Will, how are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you for so much for having me on today. I'm excited to answer some questions for you.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you today. Will, could you tell us about yourself and your role at Missouri Protection and Advocacy?
Yeah. So I'm a father and a husband here in St. Louis, and I'm an attorney for Missouri Protection and Advocacy, which is a law firm and an advocacy agency, which helps people with disabilities throughout the state of Missouri. So we serve you no matter what corner of the state you might have any kind of legal disability related issue in. I'm an attorney, and a lot of the work that I and the other attorneys do here can be very legal. You know, we do lawsuits, but we also try to resolve everything at the lowest level. So we have a lot of advocacy and talking, and we're able to help people a lot of time without ever getting to something so serious as filing a lawsuit. But we cover all different kinds of law. We don't do criminal law, but any kind of different civil aspect. We represent anyone with a disability, and we do so free of charge.
So I can't come to you if I have a. Never mind. Never mind. I wouldn't. Never mind. But I can come to you if I know I use Missouri Protection and Advocacy when I started working. To help me with my figuring out my benefits and how much I can make. So, you guys do a great job with everything that you do.
We do our best.
Yeah. And what kind of services do you guys offer?
Well, as you've mentioned, we do a lot of cases related to work and individuals that are looking to get back to work, to change work, people who have never worked before. That could be a wide variety of different cases to help people get involved in the workforce. We also take work discrimination cases if people are discriminated against by their employer. We take cases involving benefits, so Social Security, state benefits, other issues where people may be denied benefits. We can help people to appeal those denials. I do a lot of work in guardianship and alternatives to guardianship, which is, I think, something we'll be talking about a lot today. That's my favorite part of this job. And we also do a lot of cases around housing and special education, really some of the areas where people with disabilities are most likely to come into contact with the legal system.
So, you guys kind of touch around everything, honestly.
We really get a lot of fingers in different pies, for sure.
Yes, yes. Hopefully they're good pies. No,
Yes.
no. So can you tell us about what guardianship is and who it is for?
Yeah. So in the state of Missouri, guardianship is when an individual who is, turning 18 or getting older than the age that a person would normally make decisions is no longer making their own decisions. They have someone appointed by a court to make their decisions for them. And this usually happens when an individual, due to a disability or something similar, is unable to make decisions for themselves, or a court makes that decision for the person that they can't make a decision. The court will appoint someone else to make decisions for them. Usually, they prefer to appoint someone who is a family member or who knows that person really well, if there isn't anybody in that person's life who could serve as a guardian, then they'll appoint a public administrator, which is a usually elected official, but it's a government official that makes decisions for them and for lots of other people in a similar situation. So guardianship can be kind of extreme remedy. It's the thing that's at the farthest end of the line when a person can't make any decisions for themselves. And a lot of my work is helping people to have less restrictive alternatives to guardianship so that they can make as many decisions as possible. And we also do a lot of help with individuals that are under guardianship looking to get their rights restored. And now they're able to make decisions for themselves, even if they weren't able to do so before.
And I know when I was doing my research, in 2018, I believe, the guardianship law has changed. So that was within the last 10 years. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because there were some significant changes here, as there have been in other states as times have gone on, and I like to think positive changes that have really helped people. But some of the changes to our law here were designed to protect the rights of people before being placed in a guardianship, to ensure that their rights to have an effective hearing and even a trial before being placed under guardianship were ensured. To me, one of my favorite changes was making sure that we codified rights of people that are in guardianship and the different rights that you continue to have just because you've been found by the court to not be able to make decisions. You continue to have a lot of rights, and those were expanded and really clarified in the 2018 law change, I think, in a very, very positive way. I'll talk about that later, but that section of law is RSMO 475.361. And it's just a whole list of rights that people within guardianships have that maybe weren't specified so clearly before. There were more. It was a big law change in 2018.
Yeah.
And I've had the fortune of doing most of my practice after that law change, because a lot of those things have made things easier for people with disabilities, and I think protected rights a lot better than they were before.
Could you talk about the supported decision-making history movement, or the supported decision-making movement history, and how that got started?
Yeah. Well, and as part of my work, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to help people avoid guardianship and find less restrictive alternatives. One of those is supported decision making. And while there's not a kind of strict definition of what
Mhm.
supported decision making is in the law or anything, it's generally understood to be a person making their own decisions with help from their trusted friends, supporters, professionals, anyone else that they trust to help them make those decisions, with the emphasis being, I'm making my own decisions. I just go to other people to ask for help with that. And I think if you use that framework, you understand that we use supported decision making all the time. Whenever I'm talking to my wife about making decisions in my life, or I'm talking to my parents about what kind of bank I want to choose, what kind of gym I want to go to, the day-to-day decisions, but also big decisions like what kind of medications I'm going to take, or what the side effects might be too strong for me and I need to look at something different. So this is a movement, supported decision making, that really took off, I think, more formally in the 80s and 90s. And it got a start in other countries. And then those policies, those ideas trickled over to the United States, where there was the United Nations Convention on Human Rights that talked about ensuring that people with disabilities are able to make decisions to the best of our abilities, and including even difficult decisions, even when we need help to make decisions, to ensure that everyone with a disability is able to do that. The United States started to implement that in some state laws over time. After there were conventions, there were people and professionals and academics talking about the benefits of supported decision making, and states took notice and started adding things, including formal supported decision making agreements, written documents that say, here's how I make decisions with my supporter. So it really took off. And today there are many states that have supported decision making in their laws. In Missouri, as we mentioned, the 2018 revision added supported decision making to our law. It's only a single mention, and it doesn't go into a great depth or detail, but that can really work to the benefit of people in guardianship proceedings who are now able to say, I use supported decision making. I don't need a guardianship because I have this alternative in place.
Yeah. And I know when I first started and we had the supported decision making construction, is it called
It's a consortium. It's the only time I've ever used the word consortium is with this group of people.
Yeah, but that's when I first heard about supported decision making. So to see that from 5 years ago, maybe more, to now, it's really like growing and catching on. Hope. So, and I know you are a part of that group too, right?
Yeah, and I got involved when that group was in the very early stages. It was an idea imported from other states that had had similar supported decision making groups or consortiums or just people that were interested getting together. And we brought in Jonathan Martinez, who's an expert from Syracuse University in New York, and he was really able to help us get off the ground. And not, I think one of the big things that we can take benefit from people who've been working on this area for a long time is to learn from what they've done, not reduplicate efforts and use some of those resources that already exist. And the consortium, at first, it was a lot of us meeting in person before COVID. And these days, it's a lot of people meeting virtually and talking about what we can do to continue promoting supported decision making and other alternatives to guardianship because there's still a lot to be done. And while I'm always happy with what we've seen improvements and people avoiding guardianships. I think there always is more work to be done.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, and you can't stop when you think you got it because they're gonna figure out another way to get around it. Unfortunately, under guardian, what rights are under guardianship?
Yeah. With guardianship, the new rights that were instituted, and it's some of them are rephrasing of the way people's rights exist, but the way that it is written is to clarify that even in a guardianship, you still have a lot of rights, including the rights to challenge the guardianship and to be restored at the earliest possible time. For a lot of my clients, when I'm meeting them for the first time, I may say, I don't know if we went in front of a judge today, if we could get your guardianship restored, but there are a few things that you can do to show how you're improving your ability to make decisions because decision making is a skill. It's something that we can all work on and improve. And this right, the right to be restored at the earliest possible time, is really critical because then once you've gained or regained that ability to make decisions, you can go to the court and say, I'm ready to be restored. You can present all of your evidence. And that's a very significant thing for people to know that guardianship does not have to be forever.
And uh, with that, when the rights get restored, how long after the fact of going to court and get that granted from the judge till it actually get restored to the person?
Yeah, so technically, as soon as the judge issues an order, all of that person's rights that are restored right away. That instant. But I will say in practice, one of the more tricky aspects has to do with money because most guardianships come with a conservatorship, just means that your rights concerning money are also being controlled by someone else. And changing over bank accounts, doing the accounting and ensuring all that money is in the right place usually takes about a month, sometimes can take longer. So I advise my clients, yes, you've been restored. A lot of people want to access their money right away. It's what I'd want to do too. Um, I just let them know that there's a little bit of accounting that does have to take place before that aspect is fully in their control.
Well, and when I was thinking of that question, I was thinking maybe it would take like years, but that's good that it's not years. It's a month or two.
Yeah, that it really doesn't take very long, even for that aspect of money. because the judge wants to hurry along and close the case. That's that's one of the big incentives for courts is to get these cases off their docket, and we can use
Yeah,
that to our advantage.
that's true, yes. What are some current issues in Missouri regarding guardianship?
Yeah, with current guardianships continuing to be a little bit in my opinion, there's still too many guardianships, and there's still a lot of room for restoring rights and ensuring that people who don't need guardianships don't get into guardianships. So there has been some work at the state and federal level to try to reduce the amount of guardianships. There also are issues concerning some of the other rights that individuals have within guardianship. One of the most important rights is the right to communicate freely and privately with the people of their choosing, family, friends, not just the guardian, but to be able to communicate freely. And there's an ability to limit that by the guardian for reasons that are necessary to ensure the person's safety and things like that. But a big issue is that sometimes people's rights to communicate are limited in ways that I think and that some of my clients think are too much, that they should be able to continue to talk to family members and friends a lot more, even if that just means phone calls, even if that means, meeting in person once a month or something like that. So it continues to be a pretty big issue that I see a lot of times from my clients, that they feel their right to communicate is more restricted than it should be under the law. And as I mentioned before, making sure that people are restored at the earliest time, but also that they're in their least restrictive environment, that people aren't being placed in facilities or nursing homes that are really restricting their rights, when really they can live in their communities and be a part of the general life that you would expect for anybody that's not in a guardianship. A lot of the current issues have to do with ensuring that least restrictive environment.
How do other states do guardianship differently from Missouri?
Each state does things in at least a little bit of a different way. It could be very frustrating for attorneys that work in multiple jurisdictions because things just end up being so different. But for example, one thing I really like about our state is that if someone's trying to petition to get a guardianship over you or me or any other person, I would have the right to have an attorney and to have an attorney appointed for me in a similar way that you would get a public defender in a criminal trial. And that person has to represent what I want. If I tell them I don't want a guardianship, even if they think I'm going to lose, they have to represent to the court that I should not have a guardianship. That's a critical right. I love that we have that, but not all states have that. There are a few other states where they might not have the right to an attorney, or where the attorney might advocate for what they think is best rather than what me as an individual want. So there are differences in the law, in the procedure and due process for how guardianships are put into place. Another big difference that can be confusing is just the word guardian. In the state of California, instead of guardian, they say conservator, and it means exactly the same thing. So if you heard anything about the Britney Spears trial, and that was majorly in the news, they were always talking about her conservator, whereas most states that would be a guardian. And it's especially confusing here in Missouri, where conservator means a guardian over someone's money. It's a whole different term. So it can be very confusing, and the laws can be very different. One last thing I would want to point out is that the way that we do things with a public administrator for each different county that is the guardian for individuals that don't have somebody else, a family member or a friend or something to be their guardian, is not the same across the United States. There are some states where they have a single office of the guardian who is like one person that's over charge of everything, and they have deputies and people that help them. And there are many places that use more private or professional agencies to serve as guardians, whereas that's relatively uncommon here in Missouri. So it can be wildly different. There's 50 states and there are 58 different systems.
Yeah, yeah. You just have to know what your system is. Yes. Um, Could you talk a little bit about the Department of Justice investigation? Do you know?
Yes. In 2024, this was big news in the Missouri disability and especially developmental disability community. And since it's a field that I work in all the time, it was something that we had to look at right away. Was that the United States Department of Justice in 2024 issued the a report on their investigation into uh, the overuse and over restriction of guardianship, but also different kinds of ways of restricting individuals with developmental disabilities. They found, among other things, that the guardianship was overused in Missouri, and there were a lot of people that didn't necessarily need guardianship that could be served by other community-based alternatives, including to supported decision making. It was very exciting to see our work mentioned in what they found. So that investigation is still ongoing. They're still trying to work on some remedies to help our state to be the best that we can be in terms of having the right number of guardianships, or I don't know that there's ever a right number. It's more to say fewer guardianships because we don't need as many as we have right now. And that has been a really important tool in my work to show others that there is a lot of evidence now that we're doing things a little bit too restrictively and that we can do better.
Yeah, yeah, and that's good to have that backing to say, yes, suppose, um, guardianship shouldn't be that first jump go-to. There's different ways to test it out, to see if we even need to go to guardianship.
Yeah. It's really true. What we try to accomplish is to shift the idea that guardianship should be the first thing that people think of. We want it to be the last thing. We want it to be, we look at every other option to make sure that people can make their own decisions, have the most, we say, self-determination, to mean, yeah, control over our own lives. And not to say that nobody ever needs a guardian. That's not the outcome there, but it's to say we should try everything else that's reasonable to see if we can achieve people's best outcomes without needing a guardian, to see if these alternatives will work instead.
Yeah, and I like that because we don't want to strip somebody's rights away if they can do X, Y, and Z with that support, because that does take a while to get back. So yeah. Um, what what can people under guardianship right now do if their rights are violated?
That's a really important question because it does happen pretty frequently. In my work, people will call in to Missouri Protection and Advocacy to let us know they think that their right is being violated. And that can be something like we discussed communication. They're not allowed to talk to family members. I've had a few cases about religious rights where people are not allowed to attend their religious services, and that's a really important right for a lot of different people. But it could be something like a person is ready to be restored to guardianship, or they're placed in a facility or somewhere that they don't like and is too restrictive for them. There are a lot of different rights that can be violated. So I encourage anyone, of course, call us. Missouri Protection and Advocacy. We represent people free of charge all the time on this kind of issue. But you can also contact private attorneys, and you can also contact the ombudsman, especially for pretty serious rights violations. They will look into that right away. I have, for more extreme situations where people have been injured or in a lot of danger, I strongly encourage people to call the Adult Abuse and Neglect Hotline. That's a critical, important step anytime that something is very serious. And that's another resource that's available to everyone. All of those things aren't going to cost you anything other than, finding a private attorney, and that can be a little tricky. Uh, but one thing that I would also say a lot of people don't know is find out what court you're in, find out what your case number is, and you can write a letter to the judge directly for your case to let them know that something is wrong. frequently, and it's not every time, but pretty frequently, if you write in to let the judge know about a problem in your case, they'll set a hearing and may even appoint you an attorney to help you with that problem. Too many people just don't know about that because if nobody ever tells you, you're not going to know. So I always tell people, remember, even if, if our case ends, if something happens, or if you don't feel like you have anybody else in your life that you trust, you still can always write in to the judge.
So how would people know how to find what judge, or their information to write into the judge? Like, is there like a website they can look at?
There is. It's a little bit tricky to navigate. But the answer is there's a website called Missouri CaseNet that lists all the cases that are Missouri cases, not federal cases, but it would have every guardianship in there. And you can look up your name. You can look it up by case number if you happen to know your case number. And you can also look it up by date. So if you have a general idea, certainly about what year you were put in guardianship and you put in your name, that should be enough information to find your case. Look it up on Missouri CaseNet, and then it will tell you what county it's in, what judge it's in front of, and additional information so that you'd be able to reach out. And it's important to know that you're reaching out to the judge can be an informal letter. You don't have to understand how the court works. If you don't have a lawyer, you can just write a letter to the court, to the judge, mention what your case number is and what your problem is, and the law protects that communication.
Okay, that's very good to know. And I know you talked about different resources, but um, on the PNA sorry, on your website, are all these resources um on your website, or how can people find these resources that we talked about today?
There are some good resources on Missouri Protection and Advocacy's website. That website is moadvocacy.org. I also drew up a website specifically for the Supported Decision Making Consortium. I'm an attorney, not a web designer, so you can tell it's a little bit how that is. But the website for supported decision making is mosdm.org, just mosdm.org. And that has a lot of resources that I've put on there specifically for supported decision making that our consortium has worked on. There are also there are a ton of resources. I could talk about it for hours, but just a few more places. I'd say go to the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making, and that's supporteddecisionmaking.org. Missouri Family to Family, which is mofamilytofamily.org, and Charting the Life Course, which has wonderful tools that aren't just supported decision making and alternatives to guardianship. There are a whole wide swath of tools for people with disabilities, and that's at lifecoursetools.com. Those are just some of the really great resources, and I know you've got more, Candace. It's not just what I'm mentioning. These days, we're blessed to have so many things that can help.
Of course. And all the resources or the website that you discussed today, I'll make sure to add them in the info sheet so people can have a link to it with the recording. Um, well, I appreciate you taking your time out today, Will, to talk about this um important topics. Would you like to add anything else?
I would just say thank you, and I want to continue to highlight this as an important series of issues. Our state is still evolving in the way that we handle guardianship and making sure we do it in the best way. And the more that people know about it, you getting out the word and others getting out the word about where things are and what things can still improve, the better off our state will be. I'm happy to answer questions, and if anybody wants to contact me or the other people at my agency, I know we're happy to help in whatever ways we can. Not just getting out the word, but also if you have a case to call our intake unit and see if we could help you. But I would just say again, thank you so much for highlighting this and the other important issues that you highlight all the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being a guest today, and I appreciate your work on this.